Did not see that coming. Hi there, everybody. It's Ash here from Well Played, and today I want to talk to you about an indie game that is called The Plucky Squire. Being that it takes place entirely within a children's book, I thought what better than to film my segment talking about the Plucky Squire in my son's bedroom with all of his books. And once again, don't make fun of my filming setup.
Yeah, what up? Ugh.
So this is the first main entry from All Possible Futures, who they've had their hand in some Pokemon development in the past, but the Plucky Squire is all theirs. So when it comes to indie games, they're the ones I find have a little bit more gumption and try and take a real risk. And depressingly, when I say risk, I mean try something different. Sort of nail a particular gimmick, or, lean into some really cool idea. So as you've seen from the footage I've just shown, the big cool thing about the Plucky Squire is that, obviously, it takes place in a storybook. But more so than just a setting, the actual utilization of the storybook element is off the chain.
He readied his bow. It was time to finish this, once and for all.
So the Plucky Squire is about Jot, the eponymous Plucky Squire, funnily enough. And for the most part, his heroic actions are all based around stopping the advances of a silly wizard named Humgrump, who, like most evil wizards, is a bit of a tool. Jot's day starts like any other, with a minor quest to help his friend Moonbeard, before something strange happens. Out of the ordinary, Humgrump seems to be utilising some magic, which is having an adverse effect on Jot's usual go-to method of heroing. No problem, all in a day's work for the Plucky Squire, and he sets off to take care of Humgrump, making his way to a tower with his two childhood friends. And it's here that things take a bit of a turn. You see, the villainous Humgrump has realised something. He's actually clued into the fact that the Plucky Squire takes place in a book. And being a book, he's able to skip through and have a look through some of the other pages.
The Plucky Squire once again defeated the wretched wizard Humgrump.
And surprising no one, he's discovered that he is always destined to lose. So in an example of some killer villain logic, Humgrump realizes that the best way for him to finally be victorious is to literally kick Jot out of the book. Now, the storybook aesthetics up to this point are fantastic, but they're mostly based around setting. As you move from one page to the next, obviously the page will turn. And when something happens that requires a little bit of exposition, or at least just to highlight a cool moment, the pages will quite literally animate what happened. Not quite as a cutscene, but more as an illustration that's got a bit of oomph to it. But when Jot gets kicked out of the story, everything changes. Jot is the Plucky Squire, and it doesn't matter where his adventure takes him, he's still got to take care of Humgrump. Up until this point, Jot's adventure through his pages has been pretty straightforward. Sort of open world exploration like the old Zelda games where you wander around and sword things. 2D platforming segments that are just like the classic Mario games. However, once you're unceremoniously kicked out of your own book, you find yourself on a child's desk. The environment you navigate is full of all kinds of desk-related things, erasers, pencils, but also toys, playing cards, dice, dominoes, and some rather scary beetles. Navigating the space becomes easier once you realise that what Humgrump has done to you has actually infused you with something called meta magic. It's sort of had this interesting effect where now it's turned Jot into an extra-dimensional being that can jump between storybook and real world. But not just your storybook. You can enter other portals as well. So it means that when you're navigating the 3D space of the desk, sometimes you can jump into sketches as a way of getting around. The other magnificent thing that Jot gets his hands on are a pair of gauntlets that allow him to turn the pages of his very own book. Initially, this doesn't really seem to do much until you start to encounter further mechanics that are all based around the manipulation of your story. And this actually gives way to one of the coolest mechanics in the game, where you can change the writing in the book to suit your situation. Start by approaching one of the sentences on the page. Maybe you can knock one of the words loose. Maybe you can find a different word to put in that place, changing what's written. This is pretty straightforward when it's first explained to you. Obviously, it's a way to sort of solve puzzles in a cool meta storybook fashion. But then you take into account the fact that Jot can jump out of the book, turn the pages, and retrieve words from other pages. When I initially watched the reveal trailer for The Plucky Squire, a friend of mine remarked that the page-turning mechanic looked like a pretty cool level select option, but in practice it's more like time travel. You can go back to previous pages and other puzzles that you've solved, yoink solutions from them, and bring them to your current situation. Now initially I did have a little bit of concern that this does sort of elevate the game from being a real simplistic, very child-friendly adventure to being something a little bit more sort of visceral in the Mind Palace. However, the developers have managed to combat this by making sure that there is quite a few options to help people get guided to the solution. One of them is Minibeard, who is a helper of Moonbeard, who if you speak to him, he'll give you a pretty good clue on what you're supposed to do. Then, when you're out of your book and you're turning the pages, it can highlight pages of relevance. There's also some very basic but very clever accessibility options, with things like making it that enemies can take one hit to perish, or that you are invulnerable. So, easy. It also helps that the game's presentation is so full of just weapons-grade charm that if your child is playing this, you as a parent, you're probably glued to it as well. So you're going to have that cool co-pilot experience, and it's going to be great. So with exploration and compulsive completion under my belt, I got about 2.5 hours of gameplay out of the preview of the Plucky Squire. It felt like a pretty generous portion of the game. I'll probably say that I've at least played 20 to 25% of what the game has to offer. And really, the thing that surprised me was just the fact that the game never stopped leaning into its gimmick. Honestly, the way that the developers just keep harkening back to the core gimmick, the core aesthetic of the game, that it is a story taking place in and out of a storybook, is just commendable with how many ways they've managed to just tie it back into it. And if the game was at risk of perhaps getting boring or predictable at any given moment, they throw these little interstitial events at you that just completely reinvent how the game works. These mostly take place as boss fights within the game where there's an encounter where you need to do something and it will just completely change the control scheme, but in a very simple and very approachable way. The first boss is a honey badger, and the game completely changes to basically being a Punch-Out clone, and it's amazing. Later on there's a boss fight where you jump into a legally distinct not magic card to battle an elven archer, and it basically turns into a really basic JRPG. And each one of these was done so brilliantly that I just had a smile on my face the whole time. So at the very end of my time with the Plucky Squire, I found myself feeling one major emotion. Absolutely chuffed with how good it was. As far as recommendations go, I think if you're a human being with a heart, you'll probably enjoy this game. If you are a parent, you're going to have a blast playing this with your kids, and it's probably going to be one of those cases where if they ask for help with a puzzle and hand you the controller, they're going to struggle to get it back off you. So with that, I'm going to go back to my reading, and I hope to see you in the next one, and look forward to the Plucky Squire. This is Upside Down.